Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to Scientia Science Writing Internship Winter Cohort. This is our cohort 2, and this is our webinar number 4. For webinar 4, we have invited, and we are really thankful for Dr. Alex for joining us. And first of all, I would like to introduce her work. Dr. Alex has been a science communicator for nearly more than a decade for now. Uh, her work is very diverse, based on creating uh, write-ups, consisting of videos and all the stuff. So, yeah, and her background is based on genetics and PhD, and she also has a background in filmmaking. Currently, she has been working, and specifically since COVID, she has rose to prominence in especially tackling the misinformation. She has done a lot, and specifically now she's also a founder of Helicase Media, on in which regard she has been creating video for a lot of platforms. And also, we are really thankful for her time. And over to Dr. Alex. Please tell us about yourself, and thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I was mentioning before that I think this program is such an incredible opportunity. I'll tell you a little bit about how I came to be a science communicator, because I think we all come to it from very different paths. And I love that this is a part of your path that's open to you. I think these kinds of internships and opportunities are incredible. So thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk with you all. And let me bring up some slides. So I'm going to be talking today mostly about science communication for video production. This is my sort of bread and butter. This is what I do. Is I write mostly for scripts, and I write for digital video. So things that will go on YouTube, things that will go on social media. And I'll tell you a little bit about why I feel that that's important, especially in 2024, why I feel like that's an important method to try and get information out there. But I do want to talk a little bit as well about science communication as my career and how I came to be here, because again, you're all sort of on this path, and I know that it is a different path for everybody. So I want to talk a little bit about how I came to be a science communicator. So I graduated from college in 2011, and I had double majored in biology and film. And I really thought for a long time that I was going to have to either choose between being a scientist or being a filmmaker. I really thought that I was going to have to choose one of those. And I had loved both in my undergrad career, but the program I was a part of was a very new filmmaking program, so I wanted a bit more hands-on. So I went to work for a couple years at a film company in Massachusetts, doing sort of, all aspects of the production, from getting people coffee all the way to editing the videos. I did sort of all aspects of that. But I really missed talking about science. So truly as a hobby, I started a YouTube channel where I could make videos about science. And there was no part of me that thought that this could be a career or that this could be my sort of future path. I just loved talking about science, and I wanted an outlet to do it. And so this was, my first video came out in 2012. I almost didn't start my YouTube channel because SciShow had started about 6 months before. And I thought, oh, there's already one science channel on the internet. They don't need two. So it really was just a fun thing I was doing. I just wanted a way to express the cool things that I thought about science. But after that, I went back to graduate school, and I wanted to get a deeper understanding of genetics. And so this was the Post-it note that was stuck up over my bench at grad school saying, I'm here to learn. I wanted to absorb everything I could about science. And again, just thought, well, I could either be a filmmaker or I could be a scientist. And right now I'm here to learn science. And I did a lot of bench work, and I loved it. I really enjoyed being a scientist and doing research. But then I missed the creative aspects. I had started my YouTube channel as a way to talk about science, but now it was a way for me to be creative and a way for me to express myself in a different medium that I wasn't really able to do at the lab bench. And I ended up making a video with astronaut Kate Rubins. So Kate was the first person to sequence DNA in space back in 2016. And I was able to film with her and talk a bit about the work that she did. And through that, realized that, maybe there was a way to blend science and film together, and maybe make a career out of it, because a company had seen me make this video and they asked if I'd make some for them. And so I slowly started transforming this thing that had been a hobby into something that could also be a career. So I defended my PhD thesis in 2018, and since then have been incredibly grateful and lucky that I've been able to make a career out of making science videos. And I've done this a bit through, internships and pathways like the one that you're on now. So the picture on the left was taken when I was at the Jackson Wild Media Lab, which was, again, sort of an intensive couple-week filmmaking and science communication boot camp almost. It was a lab to be able to learn a lot of these skills. And I've been able to do some cool stuff. On the right, I'm working with the Genes in Space program. I make videos for them. So I've been able to find a way to take my love of science and take my love of filmmaking and merge them together into a career, where now the thing that started off just as a hobby because I couldn't stop talking about science now is my full-time career. And that means a lot of different things. Sometimes it is making videos for corporate clients. So I've made videos that I'm not in that are just sort of marketing and professional videos for clients like Ancestry, the Jackson Laboratories, Data Classroom. So there's a path where, you can be making videos or writing pieces for corporations who want to get their science and get their information out there into the world. There's also the path of social media, and I'll tell you a little bit in a minute about why I think social media can be a really powerful way to get your writing or to get your creative work out there into the world. And then also I do things like writing and hosting with organizations like the American Chemical Society, where what people see of my job is me on camera, but the majority of the work that I do for places like the American Chemical Society is writing. I spend, weeks researching topics and writing scripts and working with experts to make sure that those scripts are really strong pieces of writing before we ever get in front of a camera. But I think all of science communication, no matter what path you're going about it through, really is about asking good questions. This is the thing that I think serves me better than anything else, is being able to ask a good question and then figure out who's the person who can help me answer it. And sometimes that's having a great story idea and being able to track down which experts are doing research in that area and interviewing them and asking them for their advice and asking them for their expertise. Sometimes that's finding a fact checker who can ask all the good questions of the thing that you've written. Sometimes it's just figuring out, what do people need? I do a lot of work with teachers, and a lot of what I spend my time thinking about is, what do teachers need from me? What information do they need in their classrooms? And how can I try and help them create resources that will answer those needs? So a lot of science communication is not about the telling. It's not about answering the questions. It's about asking the questions up front. But I am incredibly grateful that I get to do my absolute favorite thing every day, which is talk with scientists, be that in the laboratory or out in the field, or scientists who've gone up to space, and then tell other people about them. I think that science communication for me is such an incredibly rewarding career, that I get to talk to people who are doing cutting edge science and then tell other people about it. And that is just so fun to me. So I know that you all are thinking about science writing, and that can take a lot of different platforms, that can take a lot of different ways to get your information out there into the world. So I want to talk about some of the social platforms and some of the online platforms that I think about a lot, and how I think that they could work as platforms to get your writing out there into the world too. So there are a lot of different potential goals that you can have from science communication and science writing. So I think these goals translate really well to the world of social media and the internet too. So you might want to make connections. You could be thinking about sharing your work or the work of others or your institution. You could be trying to stay connected with other people. There's, I think, a big important role of science communication in humanizing scientists and academics and making sure the public knows who we are and what we do. I think you could be trying to inspire people, educate people, or put yourself out there as someone who can be an expert in the world, who can be a science communicator, who can be someone that an organization might want to hire as someone to do this work for them. So I think thinking for every piece of communication that you write about what is your goal and what is the platform that can best help you reach that goal. And these can take different forms. You know, I think a lot about video platforms, so things like YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and those kinds of places. But there's also, I think, a growing number of people who are making great strides in publishing things on LinkedIn, who are getting things out there through, you know, ResearchGate is incredible for scientific work, but also I think a new platform for science writing as well. There's Substack, there's which has some issues, but there's, you know, Medium. There's all these different platforms where you can put your writing. Was there a question? No. Okay. So there's a lot of different platforms out there in the world that you can be putting the things that you've written, and I think they all have different pros and cons. But I think there have been some interesting insights into those platforms that have come out in the past couple of years. This is a report that was put together by the Webby Awards last year. So this was, it says the 2023 trend report, but it was actually put out at the end of 2022, sort of looking forwards. And it was thinking about where people spend their time on the internet and how you can reach different audiences. And they looked specifically at Gen Z. So sort of in that, gosh, I think now they'd be sort of in the 16 to 26 age range. They spend about 21 hours, or 41% of them spend 21 hours a week online, and 26% of them spend 35 hours a week online. So they are spending incredible amounts of time on the internet. This is where they're getting a lot of their information, and they're looking for a number of big things, but there are two that I think are important for science writing. One is that they're spending a lot of time online looking for connection and belonging. And the other is that they're spending a lot of time online looking for authenticity. So when people of this generation are looking for things that they're going to consume on the internet, they want to feel like they're part of a community, and they want to feel like the person who's producing those pieces of work, they want to feel like that person is being authentic and they're being themselves, and they're also a part of that community. And I think that this is something that I try and think about a lot as a science communicator and a science writer is, how do I talk about science as something that affects my community? And that doesn't necessarily have to mean my local community in Los Angeles where I live, but it can mean the community of people who are interested in similar things that I'm interested in. They can be a part of the community that, you know, I'm a dog owner. So I think a lot, you know, about what are kinds of stories that dog owners would want to see, right? Like, and that's something that I can authentically talk about. You know, I'm someone who loves genetics. So I think about the genetics community a lot. I think it can be something that is very local to a place or a cultural community or even an interest community. But I think about that a lot when I'm writing is, what is the community that I am writing for, and what specific insight can I bring to them? And I think you all are a part of a wide variety of communities, right? And again, that can mean physically where you're located. It can mean, you know, the types of things that you're interested in. It can mean your family community. It can mean all of these different things. But I think thinking about what community are you a part of and how can you write for that community, I think that hits on these two big motivators of connection and belonging and authenticity. That'll come out in your writing that, hey, I'm a part of this community too, and here's why I'm interested in this topic and why I think you should be interested in that topic too. I think these are two strong things to think about when you're thinking about your writing. The other thing I want to say is that, again, this was sort of a report that came out at the end of 2022, and I'm excited to see when these sort of new numbers come out for 2023 as well. But teens, and again, you know, I think this is an age range that I think about a lot. I'm not necessarily writing for teens or creating for teens, but I think they're, you know, the next generation upcoming. I want to make sure the things I create are reaching them. The amount of time that they're spending on platforms like Facebook is dropping drastically, but the amount of time they're spending on platforms, and this was specifically in the US, but these can be related to other places as well, you know, places like YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat, these video platforms are really increasing. So I think thinking about how your writing might translate to video might find homes in a different media or a different medium can be important as well. And again, this is US based, just because these are the numbers that I think about quite a bit, but the number of platform or just broad, not based on age, just 18 plus users who are using these different kinds of platforms is growing. So, in 2020, we saw an 87% growth on TikTok, and that's still the highest growing platform in 2021. So people are increasingly moving to these online platforms and to the newer platforms for their media and for their information. So with that, I want to give you some tools and tips to think about when you're thinking about writing broadly, but also potentially for these sort of media and video platforms. Because I think a lot of the science writing that you do, even though you might be writing first for a written platform, you've done an incredible amount of research to get to that point. You've fact checked this, you've found a story. I think you can think about how to take that story and translate it to a video platform as well. So the number one thing that I think about before I do any kind of communication, be that a written piece, a video, a workshop, anything that I'm doing, the three big things that I think about are my audience, my goal, and my environment. So the first one, when I think about audience, is who am I trying to reach? Who am I going to be talking to? And what can I assume that they know? And what can I not assume that they know? What background information do I think that they're going to bring to this piece of writing, to this video, to this presentation? What do I think that they're going to bring? And what am I going to need to provide to them? What information am I going to need to give them to make sure that they can follow along on that story with me? The next thing that I think about a lot is goal. So what is the one thing I want them to walk away from a piece of writing or information with? And again, as I talked about before, there are lots of different types of goals that you can have in your communication. Sometimes they are education, right? A new paper has come out. You want people to understand this information, and so your goal is purely informational. But I think often we have a lot of other goals as well. We might want to talk about inspiring people. We might want to ask a question of our audience. We might want to solicit, experts, information. But for a piece of communication, I think it is important to have one goal and to make sure that every sentence that you write, every frame you put into your video, every slide you have in your presentation, to make sure that every single thing supports that goal. And if it doesn't, that's where editing comes in and you can take it out. And the other thing I want to talk about is environment. So this can mean a physical environment if you're giving a talk, but it can also mean the platform that you're going to be creating this for. So I'm going to make something very different if I'm writing a news article that's going to be a written piece versus if I'm writing something that's going to be a spoken piece on a video. And even very logistically, if I'm creating a video that's going to live on YouTube, it's going to need to be horizontal versus if I'm creating a video that's going to be for Instagram, where it's going to need to be vertical. So thinking about that environment before you start writing, before you start gathering your materials is very important. And I really like this paper, and don't worry about reading what the paper actually is, but I like using this as an example of thinking about the audience goal and environment for the same story communicated in different ways. So this is a paper that came out last year in 2023. It was looking at birds, specifically cockatoos, which are little tiny birds, and how they use tools. So the story was originally told, as many science stories are, in a scientific paper. So if you think about the audience for a scientific paper, these are likely people, ooh, my light just turned off. These are likely people in the same field as the authors who are going to understand a very similar background set of information. These are people who are trying to likely advance their own research, understand something about the field. So the goal here is going to be transmitting the results of that study, right? You want to do it in a very standardized way. There's a very standardized format for telling a scientific story in a paper like this, and that is dictated by the environment, right? Cell Press, Current Biology, who published this, they have a very strict set of standards. So the audience, goal, and environment really dictated how this paper was written. But this story also showed up in sort of public media. This is just one that I took from the New York Times. And it had a different audience and a different goal and a different environment. So the same information, that same story about these birds, but the audience here wasn't other scientists. The audience was an interested public. So they're going to come to this without the strong background of knowing exactly how these birds use tools. They're going to need different information from the author. The goal here too is likely very different. It's not necessarily to specifically translate all the different, specific pieces of methods and results that this study did, but rather it's trying to instill the high level points of the paper, but also telling people the kinds of research that are out there, the kinds of things scientists are doing, using this as an example of how research might tell us more about birds and evolution and ourselves. And again, the environment is different. This was published in the New York Times. They're going to need a different set of things. So they need a title, they need a little lead-in piece of information. This starts off very differently of cockatoos contain contradictions. They behave like little gremlins, said one of the biologists at the University of Veterinary Medicine in Vienna. So it's a very different format for the same story. And it doesn't stop there. So this story also showed up on places like Twitter and places like TikTok. And again, it's the same underlying story, but told in a different way. So here, the New York Times, in their tweet, they only had 140 characters to talk about this specific story, and they used a picture to try and draw you in. On the right, there was a TikTok that came out from the New Scientist, and again, they have a very different format, but it's telling the same story. So thinking about how you can take the same information and think about your audience, your goal, and your environment. So here, the New York Times on the left, their goal is to get people to click. So how do you make the most engaging thing for people to click so they can go to the rest of the story? So thinking about your audience, goal, and environment, and how you can take that same information and craft it for these different locations, I think is important and is a really interesting exercise to sort of get you out of your head of there only being one way to tell a story. I think too, when I think a lot about video and social media, there are a couple of things that sort of turn our typical writing tactics and our typical writing information on their head a little bit. So this is a great image, I think, from Sarah Nason on Lifeology, which is another incredible resource for science communication, where on the left, when we think about writing that standard scientific article, right, how scientists write their papers, they give a long chunk of information about the background and context, and then they tell you the methods, and then they tell you the how, and then they tell you the implications and the results and what they actually found. That's entirely different from the inverted pyramid that you're likely learning in this internship of how journalism and communications works, excuse me, where you have to start with the so what, the big picture. Why do people want to read your piece? Why do they want to watch your video? Then you get into the methods and how people did it. And then at the very bottom, you give that background and context. And I think this can be hard for scientists to do. It can be hard for those of us who've been trained in science to think about, because we want to give everybody all that information up front. We want to give them all that background and all that context, but we got to flip that on its head, especially for video, for some of these platforms where people are going to swipe away in the first couple seconds. We want to give them the why, the how, the what. We want them to know what they're getting if they stay and read our whole piece, if they stay and watch our video right in that first couple of seconds. And you may have been familiar with some of these before. This book from Randy Olson called Houston, We Have a Narrative, I think is a really great method of telling a story too. All of these are different examples of how to tell a story. He talks a lot about the and, but, therefore method. And I think when we think about this in a scientific paper, we can think about this as sort of that normal pyramid of giving people all this information up front. But you can also do it in a quick hook at the beginning of a video. So the idea here is that you want to think of a story as having 3 transition points. So the and is the information up front. Some people lived in a village and they lived their lives in terror from a nearby dragon. But, right, something happens in your story. But then one day, a knight slayed the dragon. Therefore, the people of the town lived happily ever after. So this is sort of one of our standard storytelling formats, and, but, therefore. And you can see this in places like scientific papers. And I choose this one because my PhD was in genetics. I love DNA and genetics. And this was one of the first papers that came out. This was the paper that described the structure of DNA from Watson and Crick. And they follow the structure too without really realizing it. They give you this background information and they're giving you this information. But then, in our opinion, the structure is unsatisfactory. They give you that transition event. Therefore, they tell you their results. And this can be a very effective method of communication. But I think when I think about video, I think a lot about and, but, therefore. It's effective. You can use it in a hook. But often when we're trying to catch people's attention very quickly, we sort of do but, and, therefore. You know, we start with that transition moment, right? We tell people what the exciting thing is. But a knight slayed a dragon, and you go, oh, why did they slay a dragon? Then we give you that information of, well, some people lived in a village and they lived their lives in terror, but then somebody slayed the dragon. Therefore, they lived happily ever after. If you start thinking about this structure of inciting event up front, then you give the information, and then you give people the result, you'll start seeing it in a lot of online videos. I think a lot of things, you know, short form videos, social forward videos that are sort of these 60-second you know, Instagram and TikTok and YouTube shorts sort of formats, they'll give you something really big and flashy up front. They'll give you that but. Then they'll tell you the information, then they'll tell you the but again, and then they'll tell you the therefore. But you want to think about that. That but can be a really incredible hook up at the beginning. So you really do need a hook in that first second or image of what you're doing, especially for video on the internet. So you can again, as I just said, you can preview what's coming up later. You give them that big point up front. Or the other 2 things that are very effective, you can ask a question. People love being asked questions. So why do you think? Did you know? Using you in that first line, really making things personal to people, can be incredibly effective to get them thinking, well, do I know this? Why do I think this? What do I think? You can get people sort of thinking about themselves, thinking about their own opinions, and thinking about why this scientific story is important to them. Because unfortunately, how information is disseminated has changed. Now, this is, in fact, a bit outdated now. This was from 2018, but this was a study that found that stories online that inspire strong emotions and things like fear, disgust, and surprise really spread quite quickly and had a bit more of a viral moment than things that were just happiness, joy, trust, things that inspire big emotions up front, things that inspire people to think about themselves up front do quite well. And we don't necessarily, as science communicators, want our stories to inspire fear or disgust, but surprise can be a big one. Surprise is one where if you can get people thinking, oh, I didn't know that, that's a great way to pull people in. So this study was, in fact, a little bit sad to me because it was saying that, you know, things that make people angry, things that make people scared, they spread really far and wide. And I think we know that. We can see that in the news. We can see that on social media. But surprise can be a positive one, but surprise can also be very powerful. So giving something that is going to surprise them, that's going to make them think differently about their world, can be very effective in spreading a story. And I, you know, as was mentioned at the beginning, I did a lot of communication during COVID, and the fact that stories and surprise are so important was very, very clear. So one of the big things that came up as a talking point during COVID was whether or not the RNA vaccine would change people's DNA. And the scientific answer is no, right? The RNA vaccine isn't going to change your DNA. We can say that with some very good certainty. But misinformation out there would say, well, maybe. what if, and this was a story that was trying to claim that, it could turn you into a zombie, right? It can turn your body into a virus making factory. And that inspires surprise. It inspires disgust. It inspires fear. And that story spread so much more widely because it was a story that elicited an emotion than the actual answer that was no. So I think that we as science communicators need to figure out, okay, well, how do we tell the correct information? How do we tell that no, but still tell it in a way that is a story that surprises people, that maybe gets them thinking, but without it being scary or bad or mean? The other thing that I think can really help people sort of connect to a story, can help get them through that sort of surprise point, is to make science really local. So to think about, how can someone use the information that I am giving them in their daily life? How can you create a moment that they're going to think about later? And I have a picture of a bird here because this was first related to me by someone who was a science teacher. And he used to teach his students about local birds, right? He would make them pick 5 different birds to learn about that were in their local area every year. And they'd have to tell him, a couple different facts about these birds. And he said that years later, he bumped into one of his students at a grocery store, I think. And they said, "Oh my goodness, Mr. O'Dell, I saw that bird the other day. And I think about your class every time I see that bird. I think about the science that you taught us every time I see these birds in my environment." So thinking about ways to connect science to something that people are going to think about later, connecting it to something that they're going to see in their everyday life, connecting it to something that they're going to really relate to make that science local, is so important to them coming back to it and recognizing how it can be used in their daily lives. And this is really important because public stories about science can have really big impacts, and the timing of those is important. So this now, my goodness, was over a decade ago. And this was a big story in Time magazine that Angelina Jolie came out and talked about the fact that she had a genetic mutation that put her at higher risk for things like breast and ovarian cancer, and that she had had a double mastectomy as a preventative measure against these kinds of cancers. And this was a huge story when it came out. And it was a story that caught a lot of public interest and then actually had an effect on people's behavior. So this came out, I think you can probably tell, right, in 2014, where there's this spike. So here on the x-axis, we're looking in time. On the y-axis, we're looking at 100,000 women who asked for genetic testing for this same type of mutation that Angelina Jolie had. So you can see a noticeable spike in that testing when that paper came out. Someone coming out and talking about this science, talking about how it affected their life, had a true and visible impact on what other people did to try and impact their own health. So these kinds of big scientific stories about what science is and how it could impact your life can have real impacts on people's actions. I also think that, this is maybe a slightly sillier or not example, but a more recent example that another popular actor, Chris Hemsworth, came out and talked about the fact that he has a mutation in a gene called ApoE4 that impacts his potential of getting Alzheimer's. So this story came out in December of 2022. He talked about the fact that he had this genetic mutation, and I went and looked at the Google Trends for ApoE4 and Alzheimer's right after that. And you can see this spike specifically in searches for ApoE4, but also in searches for genetic testing right around the time that that paper came out. Now, I didn't put it on this graph because it would have overwhelmed the results, but searches for his name spiked up at that time too. So this story came out talking about how something in science impacted someone's life, and people took to Google and started asking questions about those things in response to that. So big scientific stories that tell people how science might impact their life and gives examples of that can impact people's behavior. And we can actually see that in what they're doing and what they're searching for. So thinking more specifically about science stories that will go into video, you're doing a lot of science writing. You're thinking about the words, but something I think about a lot too is, what am I going to show as I'm saying those words? What visuals am I going to include in my video? So this is an example script from a video I made a couple years ago about moths. And so we were talking about something called the codling moth and about some new scientific advances that were trying to help farmers prevent these moths from taking over their fields. So we have one column in the script that we were writing about the audio, the voice, what I was actually going to say in this video. Then we have an entire other column about the footage, about the graphics. Are we going to need some B-roll of those moths? Are we going to need the larva of that moth eating some fruit to demonstrate what we're talking about? Could we get an animation of a larva eating an apple kind of thing? And then over on the right, once we start filling this in, we would add in, where are we going to find those graphics? Where did this information come from? But as I'm writing a video script, I'm constantly thinking about, what can I show at the same time? What can I do to keep people's interest, to keep people thinking about this? And I think you can translate this to written stories as well. What images are you going to show in your written piece to support the words that you have? Do you need an infographic? Do you need a graph? Do you need just a picture? I think thinking about those things early as you're doing the writing rather than as a last step can help make sure that they feel integrated all the way through. Now, when I'm doing a video production, I also will sometimes do some storyboarding. Now, this is a very complex storyboard, thinking about, these are not my drawings. I cannot draw this well. That's why I stand behind a camera and I'm not an artist who draws things. But you want to think before you ever turn on a camera, before you take, even if you're taking still photos to go along with a written story, before you do that, you want to have an idea of what you want to capture. And you can write this down as words. You can draw stick figures. You can make beautiful images like this. But creating a storyboard and then a shot list of what you want to go out and capture, what images you want to go along with your story, thinking about these things before you ever turn on a camera, before you ever start making an infographic or a graphic, can be a very important technique. If you are interested in doing video editing, it can be a expensive field to get into. There are plenty of organizations out there who want to charge you hundreds of dollars for video editing software, but you don't need that. So CapCut is an incredible free tool on either your phone or your computer that is a free video editor that will allow you to play around with things and get used to settings, but is still incredibly powerful. So there are free tools out there. You have to look for them sometimes, but this one I think is incredible. If you want to start playing around with video, you want to start trying things out, CapCut is really incredible and free, which we love free. So another couple things, if you do want to get into filming, playing around with this, I think the best way to do it is just to try it out. But there's some practical things to think about too. One of them is lighting. You want light to come from the front of you. So this is 2 pictures that I took in my old lab in exactly the same chair, just facing in 2 different directions, one with the light behind me, one with the light in front of me. So filming with that light coming in at you from a window, just little practical things like that can make your shot look much better. The rule of thirds is something that you'll hear about a lot in both still photography and in video production, where if you split the screen up into thirds, both vertically and sort of horizontally, you want things to lie on these lines. So seeing how here this character's eyes are sort of falling right on this line of lower thirds, or this sort of upper third line, his body is falling along this line here. It just makes a very aesthetically pleasing picture. So as you're framing things, and often on modern, phones as well that have cameras, they will have a setting where you can actually have these come into your frames. So you can try this around. It just makes things a little bit more visually pleasing. And you can see that here too. This is just an example from Wikimedia where this is the same picture. And here, this rock formation is sort of centered in the middle of the frame. But here it's over on that third line. And it's just a nicer picture. It just feels like there's more breathing room. It feels like you can really see this sort of outdoor scene a little bit better in whatever this formation is with that rule of thirds. The other thing that I would say is that if you do want to get into video production, video quality is surprisingly much less important than sound quality. So if you have a webcam on your computer, if you have a camera on your phone, that really these days is all you need for the video part. But the sound is the thing where if you wanted to get one piece of gear, I would recommend you try and get something for a microphone, because people will watch ugly video with beautiful sound, but they will not watch beautiful video with bad sound. And I'm sure you've encountered this before too, where you can get by on watching something where maybe the video quality isn't quite as nice, but it sounds great. You know, you can get by that versus the other way. If the video is beautiful, but the sound is terrible, we just intrinsically want to turn it off. So getting something small, these are both little microphones for, under $25 that will plug into your phone, will make the sound a little bit better. If you're going to go out and interview someone, being able to capture that sound in a really nice way can be very important. And just doing something like this, adding a little microphone to their shirt, being able to sort of hold something up to them can really capture some incredible sound for not too much. You could there are microphone companies who will want to sell you, $500 microphones. You don't need it, right? Even something very simple can just upgrade your quality. The other thing that I would encourage you to think about is to give yourself constraints. So this can be in writing, this can be in film. I think that when you're writing something and you get very into it and you're very excited about it, it's easy to put all of the information on the page. I think it can be a powerful exercise sometimes to say, okay, but what if I had to tell that same story in 100 words? What if I had to tell that same story in 30 seconds? That doesn't mean it's going to be your final product, but I think that the constraints that some of these platforms can give us, like, TikTok videos were 21 to 34 seconds in length, that's where things perform the best. I think thinking about those constraints and using it as an exercise to say, okay, I have my big long writing piece, but what if I had to tell it in just 100 words? Giving yourself that exercise will let you know for your longer piece, what are the important parts? What really is my goal? If I only had 2 sentences to tell somebody this story, well, it's just going to be these 2 sentences. Aha. So that means in my long piece, everything needs to be leading back to those 2 sentences. So I think sometimes the constraints of these platforms, the idea of what if I had to tell the story in just 30 seconds? For me, that's a really important exercise to figure out what is the core of that story that I'm trying to get across. So I would really encourage you when you're writing, even if you're writing a long piece, to step aside partway through and say, okay, but what if I only had a little bit of time? Yes, I see a raised hand. Please ask a question. Oh, I do think you're muted.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good too. Sorry, I just raised a hand for the end of the session where will we have a question and answers. That session.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. We'll come back to it
I'm
then.
sorry. I'll put on hand.
No, that's okay. I'm almost right at that point anyways. I just have a couple more slides left, because one of the things that I do want to encourage people to do, at the end of either a written piece or a video piece, is think about what you want your audience to do at the end of that. Do you want them to feel inspired to share that video? Do you want them to feel inspired to ask a question about their lives? I think giving people the call to action at the end of what you want them to do. Maybe you want them to take a social action. Maybe you want them to think about something more broadly in their lives. Giving that at the end of your piece, I think, is a way to really allow people to carry that scientific information out with them into the rest of the world. I do want to give you a couple additional resources that I think are really incredible for science communication and science writing. So one is Lifeology. They do really great sort of short form pieces, often with little comics attached, on how you can take science communication research, so people who have done research into the most effective methods of science communication, and translate them into your writing and into your pieces. So Lifeology is something that I recommend all the time. I also think that the Open Notebook is a great resource. So they came out with a book, The Craft of Science Writing, a few years ago that I found to be incredibly helpful. But the Open Notebook also has a number of free online resources for science writing and for thinking about science production that I find to be incredibly useful. So both Lifeology and the Open Notebook, I think, are really, really useful resources. And so with that, I would love to open it up in our last sort of 15 minutes here for a Q&A. But before I do that, I've put my email address here on the screen, and I really want to encourage you to use that. If you have something that you want help with, if you have a story that you want feedback on, please, please contact me. I totally understand that this is a hard field to get into. It's, hard to sort of find paths of where to go and what to do and sort of how to advance in this field. So please reach out to me on social media, send me an email. If there's ever anything that I can help you with, I am so happy to do that. I love giving presentations like this. I love engaging with people who are getting into science writing and science communication. So again, if there's any way that I can help, you have my email, please reach out. And so with that, I would love to answer any questions that you have.
Oh, all right. I think for the Q&A, I would like to stop the recording and then we can carry on with the Q&A.
Of course.